Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding. His church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
I'm Gabe Lyons. Welcome to another edition of the Q Podcast. And today we're excited to have with us a guest, John Mark Comer. He's been someone who's been frequently a part of our Q conversations. Most recently, him and Roberta Amundsen having a conversation on deconstruction in church history at our Q&A event. But today I want to talk to him a little bit more. We want to move forward with that idea. There's so much interest in people hearing some clear thinking about this. The idea of progressivism. What does that mean? Is it really progress? And it sounds so good. So how could it possibly be bad? We want to get into that, get his perspective on it, and also see what kind of favorite topics he's looking forward to that we're going to address at this year's 15th annual Q event, our Culture Summit, taking place April 22nd and 23rd, which, by the way, if you're not already planning to join us, and you can join us in person, there's still a few seats in Nashville, but everybody around the world can join virtually. So plan that on your calendar, April 22nd and 23rd from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Central Time, and you can learn more about that, all the topics we're talking about, the expert Q&As you're going to be able to have directly with people like John Mark at qideas.org/culture summit. So check that out. But right now, I want to welcome in John Mark Comer, pastor for teaching and vision at Bridgetown Church in Portland, Oregon. He's the author of My Name is Hope, Loveology, Garden City, God Has a Name, and his newest bestseller called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. He lives in Portland, Oregon. And we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like pastoring in a city that's ultimately quite progressive, leads the way in our country, and a lot of its ideas and ideals and how those play out in the local culture. So let's welcome in John Mark Comer. John Mark, it's great to have you with us today. Thanks for your work, your ministry leadership, the authority with which you walk in. I know you bless so many people, including me and my family. So thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, that's very gracious. It's an honor and good to see you.
Yeah, so I think what I have so loved about your work, your writing, there's a history piece and component to this where you really recognize context and an understanding that lots of things we're dealing with today as the church or as Christians aren't necessarily new. These are things the church has dealt with. And we talked about it a little bit when you were with us at our Q&A event several months ago, this whole discussion around deconstruction and how people today are having a time with deconstructing what it means to be Christian. Who do we trust anymore? That's just in the air. But that's not necessarily completely new. Could you just describe for people listening, and they haven't heard that conversation for the first time, why deconstruction isn't something the church is dealing with for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, I was reading a book just a few weeks ago by Gordon MacDonald, and that I could not give you the quote verbatim, but he had this great paragraph where he basically said, whenever we face a difficult question, issue, problem, the first thing we should ask is, how have previous generations of followers of Jesus thought about this? What answers have they come up with this question? What does it look like in other cultures, other times, other places? And so to think about some of the acute problems of the modern soul, some of which are new, like deconstruction is a word that dates, a technical term that dates to the French philosopher Derrida in the 1960s in French postmodernism. So some of it is new, but yet some of it is very old. The abuse of power, including the abuse of power by those in the church, is not a new problem. That is a very ancient one that goes all the way back to before Christ, goes back to Genesis chapter 3. You could argue that the Genesis narrative is kind of a defining narrative about how humans were created for power. To rule is the word in Hebrew, or radah. It means to have dominion. It means to be a king or a queen. And yet, obviously, in Genesis 3, it does not go very well. It goes poorly. And ever since, we've been making mistakes with power. And so the Protestant Reformation was one form of, you could call that deconstruction, based on the abuse of power in the church and all sorts of ways that the church was corrupted by the world. The new kind of spin post Derrida and in the modern world is it's the corruption not of the church by the world, but the world by the church. It's almost this like turning of the tables where much of what people are reacting against is the abuse of power in the church, but much of what people are reacting against is also orthodoxy and theology and the way of Jesus and the stewardship of power in any way, shape, or form. And that is a semi-new phenomenon.
Yeah, it seems it's fundamental that anything that's putting boundaries around a person's life, behavior, decisions they ought to make, anything that's positing authority in a power that's outside of ourself is the problem in this culture, right?
That's considered oppression.
There's a real desire.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a desire to get outside from underneath that. It feels oppressive. And yet, as Christians, we joyfully submit into this higher authority, into this way of life, into this way of being that we know leads to life and leads to flourishing, but it doesn't always feel that way in the moment. It's something that requires sacrifice and suffering, and that's not necessarily something anybody wants to walk through.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the larger kind of conversation for our culture, religious or not, Christian or atheist. You know, the shift, some historians would frame it as the shift from Augustine to Freud. So what that means is just for thousands of years, people, just wise, mature people, whether they were Buddhists or agnostics or Christians, they're the two kind of predominant thinkers on what to do with all of the desires that we have, that all of us have that are contradictory. I want to lose 20 pounds and I want to drink red wine and eat dessert every single night. But those are two very real, authentic desires in my life right now. I'm living that COVID-19 at every level. So I have these two contradictory desires. How do I know which one to sate and which one to reject, right? And so for thousands of years, the two kind of primary thinkers, at least in the West, were Aristotle for more secular or Greco people and Augustine. And they basically said, we have these desires. And the primary problem with human beings is that our desires are disordered. So it's not that we don't love, it's that we either love the wrong things or we love them in the wrong order. So this is the origin of famous quotes like Pascal's. We have this God-shaped hole of much of the work of Tim Keller and others around that concept of idolatry in the secular age, how money, sex, and power have become these de facto gods. If you think about sexuality, in particular, a city like mine, sex is not just a bodily impulse or a way to make more children. It is a soteriology, meaning people are looking to it as like a doctrine for salvation. People are finding identity in it, their sexuality. They're finding a community of belonging in it. They're finding a moral worldview based on it. They're looking to find deep life and happiness and contentment and satisfaction and joy in their sexuality. And what Aristotle and Augustine and many others would both say is, listen, it was never designed to bear that weight. It's not God. It will fracture you and fragment you and lead you to a very dark path. Not because it's a bad thing, because it's a good thing, but it's not ultimate. And what Freud has come, and we're really living in the aftermath of Freud, is basically said that, so if previous thinkers said we have these disordered desires, and to be happy and free, we need to discipline our desires into submission to something higher and greater, whether that's God and the writings of the New Testament and the teachings of Jesus, or, Greek virtue ethics, or your country, or whatever it is. Everybody agreed we have to discipline those desires. That kind of thinking is anathema now in the post kind of Freud world. Freud basically, this is a gross oversimplification, but basically said the cause of our neurosis is that we have all these repressed desires, and that society has repressed our desire in order to keep things organized and hierarchical and keep the right people in power and keep anarchy and Antifa from taking over everything. But that's what makes us unhappy and the cause of our neurosis. And so we have to free ourselves from these traditional roles and expectations on our gender, on our faith, on our sexuality, on our lifestyle, on whatever. We have to be free to kind of be who we are. And so it's this massive redefinition of freedom from the ancient kind of Greek and Christian definition where you were free to do what is good, to the kind of Freudian secular West definition where you're just free to do whatever you want. It's Princess Elsa. I always talk with my kids that the line from Frozen, in her song, Let It Go, it's like, no right, no wrong, no rules for me, I'm free. That's literally being indoctrinated into our generation. Like freedom means no right, no wrong, no rules for me. that's what it means to be free. And that's actually what.
That's right. And the cardinal sinner in that scenario is the person who would call out that anybody's doing anything wrong. Like you're the worst person in society or culture if you would suggest that. One of the latest research reports I saw out today was that for the first time in nearly a century, the number of church attenders in American culture has dropped below 50%. I think back in 1934 when Gallup did it, it was 73 or 74%. Today it's 49%. You're seeing this steady decline where people are not looking to the church as a part of their daily life, part of their weekly life, a place that they're finding home or they're finding this basis in truth. Are you surprised to hear that? And if not, I mean, you're in Portland, so I know you deal with being in a post-Christian society for many, many years ahead of a lot of people. But if you're not surprised to hear that, what is the opportunity when church membership starts to drop like this?
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm laughing. From Portland, if 49% of my city went to church, that would be like the second coming of Christ is around the corner. We would literally be elated and jumping for joy. I don't even want to know what the percentage is in my city. There's no official study. I would imagine it's under 2% for sure. But so no, that's not surprising to me. And I think, at a meta level, cultural Christianity is burning up. And there's a sad side to that. I'm now raising my children. I say this with great sensitivity, but at least in a city like Portland, I think the public school systems are becoming unworkable for Christian families anymore who want to raise their children into a basic anthropology of healthy humanness. And so there's sadness to me. Like I'm having all sorts of conversations with my kids that, you know what I mean? I wish I didn't have to have these conversations, and they're doing great. But so this, not all of Christendom was bad. But the hope for me, the optimism in me, is that all that is left in the Portlands of the world, the New Yorks of the world, and coming soon to a Dallas near you or whatever, are really robust disciples of Jesus. Like that's all that's left, because all of the cultural pressure is against the faith and against church right now. Not only is there a hostility against orthodoxy, there is a hostility against the church, even from many progressive Christians who would just, a deep hostility toward any form of organized church at all. And so there's even a shame. Like I've been meditating a lot on just Hebrews, that line, let us go outside the camp bearing his disgrace. I mean, we think of Jesus was crucified by the majority culture, and that wasn't that wasn't a virtuous thing. That was a place of disgrace and reproach and shame. And so now, as Christians in the West, we're beginning to take on. We've gone from weird, which is what it was like when I was in high school. Like, oh, you're weird. Like you don't have sex with your girlfriend before you get married or whatever. Okay, that's weird. To now the view is you're bad, you're dangerous, you're a threat to our society, you're a threat to our freedom. We don't trust you. We need you out. You're a threat to justice now in our city. The moral lines have been so redefined. So the upside to that is I think we're living through a sheep and the goats moment. There is our mutual friend, Mark Sayers, said recently, it's an apocalyptic moment, and if you think about that word apocalypsis in Greek, it doesn't mean like a giant disaster. It means an unveiling where all of a sudden you see the universe as it really is. And I think with the fall of celebrity pastors, with the decline in church, with the politics taking over Christian orthodoxy on the left and on the right now, you're seeing kind of an unveiling. Those people were actually cultural Christians. Those leaders were actually in it for other reasons. And what you're left with is the sheep. You're left with people that really are, we're up for bearing cultural shame because we think Jesus is better.
Yeah, and I know when people hear that could feel discouraging, but there is an encouragement in that. There's a call to faithfulness. There's a call to removing everything outside of Christ as being a priority in our life. Yeah. And I think in those ways, it can be encouraging. I'm excited that you're going to be with us for the Culture Summit, April 22nd and 23rd, and you're going to be carrying forward some of what we began to talk about a few months ago around progressive Christianity with a talk and an interview conversation we're going to have around where progressive Christianity leads without giving everything away that we will discuss in that. I mean, why do you think that's such an important thing for Christian leaders to understand as they try to walk through this sheep and goats moment?
Well, I mean, I think the progressive narrative is, it's built into that word progressive. It's that history is moving toward a kind of utopian future where in the secular version, we shed the constraints of religion and superstition and traditional ethics and gender roles and all of that kind of stuff into this new definition of freedom. And it's kind of utopian bliss. And we're all living in these great cities, having sex with whoever we want and happy, and drugs and therapy have solved all of our emotional problems. And that's a cynical read on it. And so, but in that narrative, if you don't buy into the progressive ideology around whatever it is, you're thought of as behind, you are on the wrong side of history is language that is used, you're even obstructing justice or whatever it is. And so there's extraordinary pressure. And the thought is basically, this is where history is going. Get on, or you're going to end up, we're going to look back at you the way that we now look back at people that supported slavery or some heinous, grotesque thing. And that is a powerful narrative. I think it is a completely untrue narrative. I don't think it's true historically. I don't think it's true theologically. I don't think it's true sociologically, but it's a powerful narrative. And I think the reality is there is no future, both for progressive Christianity. I question whether or not there's a future for progressivism long-term in politics, because raising children is not a part of the life script. And the reality is that there's a growing gigantic divide between progressive elites and the people that they often speak for. Many people of color, immigrants to our country, working class people who are often Christians or social conservatives and have often radically different worldviews. So there's even a question of whether or not cities like Portland are the future. They're definitely the interim future. Are they the long-term future? I'm more and more skeptical of that. Mm-hmm. So all that to say, I think the narrative is get on board or you're going to miss the train. I actually think the train is going off of a cliff, and now is the best time to get off.
Yeah, the narrative becomes so strong. I was reading Thomas Sowell and some of his work as a great economist over the last 50 years, African-American. And someone asked him specifically, when did you change from a liberal, who was somebody who really was pursuing progressivism, even some Marxist ideas? When did you move from that to becoming conservative? And he said, when I looked at the facts. Yeah. It was like, he said, the progressive vision is very sweeping. It looks wonderful. The problem is it doesn't actually work. Yes. And nowhere that you study it does this work out well. Yes. And so I think the facts tend to confront these things as we move forward. Well, I want to let you go here, but I had one final question. At Q, we're always talking about multiple topics and ideas, and we have over 35 different presentations taking place over the course of these 2 days. Any particular topics that you're looking forward to hearing more about? I love that Rich Velotis is giving a talk on, what's the title, The Future of Celebrity Christianity or something like Christianity,
that. Yeah. I mean, I love his work. I love him. Anytime he has something to say, I'm listening. And I think that's a really interesting question, in particular with some of the breakdowns in leadership over the last year in the American church. That's one in particular that I will make sure not to miss. Yeah, I think we want to address all of that because of how much that's seeped into the culture of American evangelicalism and this whole celebrity perspective. And I think it's becoming more and more obvious to people how it doesn't work out. Yes, and it's tied to deconstruction for sure. Yeah, and we want to shed light on that, and Rich, it's going to be amazing to draw attention to that so we can think better about it. Well, John Mark, thank you for being a part of all of this. Thank you for the way that you're leading, and we're looking forward to being with you in a few weeks. Can't wait, Gabe. I always enjoy talking to John Mark, and I can't wait for our conversation at our next Culture Summit, April 22nd and 23rd. We're going to dig into where progressive Christianity leads. We're going to take some of the ideas that we just began to talk about today and take those further. I would encourage you, if you're leading a church staff or perhaps just in your family, you're having conversations about faith, about theology, you're going to want to tune in, not only for this 18-minute conversation, but for so many others that are going to help really buttress people's faith and give them confidence that the way we believe as Christians, the way we live that out in love, actually brings human flourishing to our neighbors and to our friends. And so John Mark will be a part of that with us, along with so many others, 35 presentations on multiple topics, on the topics that we believe you need to know as you lead in 2021 into 2022. We've taken special care to get the best experts on a variety of subjects and topics that you're going to want to know about. So learn more about that at qideas.org/culture summit, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.